Good afternoon, everybody, or good morning, or good evening, wherever you are in the world, and welcome to the BHN webinar on the synergies of boutique hotels and short-term rentals. My name is Eloise Hanson. I'm the editor of Hospitality, and I cover Boutique Hotel News, which is a global B2B multimedia platform, and we cover the boutique, lifestyle, and luxury hotel sectors. I'm going to be at the Independent Hotel Show in London next week, so if any of you want to get in touch and arrange a meeting, please drop me a line on the contact details there in the chat. Sponsor of today's webinar is Alliance, a guest experience platform, and to introduce the company, we're just going to share and play a short video for you. And further details on Alliance have been popped into the chat there if you would like to learn more. Now let's meet our panelists today, and I'm going to move from left to right as per the PowerPoint screen to allow each to introduce themselves. So I'm going to be kicking off with Eric. Over to you.
Thanks, Eloise, and a big thank you to Hotel Boutique News for having us. It's a great pleasure. My name is Eric. I work as head of hotels at Sletta. We are a mid-sized pan-Nordic investment fund that focuses primarily on residential and logistics and light industry, but we have, since a year back, also launched a hotel investment vertical that I'm leading. We are primarily investing into Sweden and Finland, but we are quite eager also to expand further into the two other remaining countries.
Thank you, Eric. And Daniel, I'm coming to you next, please.
Super. Thanks, Louise. Daniel Fansalo, my name. I'm joining you today from Helsinki, Finland. Thank you for the invitation. I've spent most of my career in hospitality, have the pleasure of working with brands such as Hyatt and Six Senses. And more recently, I'm currently the head of development for Earth Hotels. We're a nature hospitality company, operating in the space in a kind of hybrid model of boutique hotels versus STRs. So I think this is going to be a very interesting discussion. So delighted to be joining today, and thanks for the invite.
Oh, very welcome, Daniel. And Nadine, last but not least, over to you.
Thank you, Eloise. Yeah, very nice to be on this webinar today. I'm Nadine. I'm head of product innovation at OTA Insight. At the core, for those of you who don't know OTA Insight, we are a commercial platform mainly geared at hotels to make better commercial decisions. So from your pricing over to your hotel room distribution. But lately, we also acquired a company called Transparent that has always acted in the short-term rental space. So we are actually in the course of creating our own synergy, which is very much in line with this webinar and which makes it very relevant for me to be here today.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you all for those intros. And just to flag here that all LinkedIn profiles has been popped into the chat there, and I encourage everybody to connect with our speakers today. Just to provide a very quick overview of how this webinar is going to run, we typically spend around 45 minutes in discussion with our panelists today, followed by some time at the end to take any questions from the audience. So if you do have any questions, please use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screens, and I will get around to asking these as and when. And as a reminder, this webinar is being recorded, and every registrant will receive a copy of that recording within a couple of days' time. Now, if this is the first time that you've joined one of our webinars, I always like to flag some context, and these are stories that we've published on Boutique Hotel News or any of our sister sites across, say, the last year or so. And even last week, Hyatt has announced plans to launch a new short-term vacation rental platform, Homes and Hideaways, which will initially be available to bookers and members in the United States. And it closely follows the acquisition of Mr. and Mrs. Smith which also offers a luxury private villa collection. So we can see that even big players such as Hyatt are embracing the short-term rental sector and seeing opportunities for growth. But to focus on the boutique hotel segment, independent hotels such as Somero, Ellenborough Park, the Tawny, are all examples of how properties are diversifying their offerings and expanding into self-catering accommodations. On the next slide, developers are also exploring short-term rental experiential accommodation. So Orascom has last week revealed it will open a luxury glamping experience at El Guna in 2024, which will sit alongside 18 hotels within that gated community in Egypt. But on the other side, on the vice versa, short-term rental property management companies are also finding opportunities within the hotel sector. Sonder has launched its first hotel collection in August this year, which debuted with an initial 23 properties. And Bob W will rebrand the Hotel Rivoli Jardin in Helsinki and will operate the site for both short and long-term stays. So I hope that's provided some food for thought and set some context for today's conversation. We are going to be talking about the synergies of boutique hotels and short-term rentals, but to begin with, I'm first going to hand over to Nadine, who's going to highlight some key trends that are impacting the hotel and short-term rental sectors. So Nadine, over to you.
Thank you. Yeah, absolutely. I would love to set the scene just with a couple of key figures and some trends I personally also find interesting as we keep on learning more about rentals, hotels, and how they're alike or not alike. So let's directly go into the first slide. And I think it's already an interesting key figure we should just think about for a second. So worldwide on Airbnb, there are more than 7 million total active listings today. This is only Airbnb. And with that said, and we had a little pre-discussion already in this group before this webinar, I think it's safe to say this is a trend. They're not going to go away. Hate them, love them, embrace it as an opportunity, but pick your corner because this is something we'll have to deal with for the years to come. And it's only the beginning. If we go to the next slide, I just want to illustrate quickly some typical data points we like to share with our own clients, because often hotels, they tend to be very locked into their own perception of what their competitors are, which hotels they keep an eye on. It's often a direct copy of themselves, which is not per se wrong, but if you just look at, let's say, a market like Toronto and you see where all the hotels are located and how they're concentrated around the center, if you go to the next slide and you overlay the number of short-term rental listings, it's a lot. It's quite shocking if you just see it like that. And it looks like this for most of the key markets around the globe, to be fair. So to say that it is not relevant is probably cutting it short at this point in time, though not every market is the same. If we just go for a couple of examples to the next slide, I wanted to share, while Airbnb has really grown their listings tremendously, this is not the case in every single market. So while some markets, like for instance, Paris, have really exploded in terms of inventory, and I would say inventory overall is on the rise, what you also see is that in some of the markets, which is, we can't forget, where regulations have been set to really contain the expansion, you do see a big decrease, obviously a lot less investment in that space as well. I believe also this is something that is happening in Barcelona, and we will probably see more of this in the years to come. So definitely a space to watch, especially if you are to invest in those businesses or you want to put your money behind, I would say. So let's look at a couple of key stats of some main cities. And that's obviously always something, occupancies and rates, they're always of great interest. And I find a couple of things very interesting here. I just chose 3 markets in Europe, because we're all in Europe here, to compare the occupancy throughout the year for hotels versus vacation rentals. And while you can see roughly, I would say they follow a similar shape. So hotels still in terms of occupancy outperforming the short-term rentals, but don't forget there's a lot of inventory also in the market. You can see that the gap between the two is actually much larger, for instance, in the beginning of the year, where typically those are the months when only business travelers are traveling. So it's not very touristy. I know that the short-term rental industry is also trying to tap into business travel, but I think this illustrates that still it's mainly the leisure months where you can see a lot of competing offerings, and this is really where these two lines are much closer to one another than during the off season. So that is interesting. However, they follow the same trend. Why do I keep on saying that? Because if, on the flip side, if we look at the rates of these markets on the next slide, so at the average selling price, this is not really the case, right? So you see a lot more seasonality in the rates of hotels versus short-term rentals overall. And that's something I guess we'll speak about some trends later on in terms of the professionalization of the space versus the hotel industry, where you have a lot of probably revenue management already implemented. But that I always find fascinating. So overall, the rate is cheaper, knowing that this year there has been a boom in inventory and the hotel rates are very expensive. So we've seen in all the markets a massive increase over last year, partly due to inflation, but also partly due to luxury travel coming back and travelers, quite frankly, being very willing to pay. So I'm sure some of the boutique hotels have seen this as well. Very curious to hear to what extent that is representative for that specific sector, because that is obviously overall in the markets. But that's definitely one to watch. Two trends I would love to share, and those are probably my favorites if we go to the next slide. Number one is the pickup behavior of this. And this is interesting for hotels because while potentially we end up with a higher occupancy in that space, what is interesting is that the short-term rental business usually picks up earlier. The base comes in very much ahead of time, which makes it for the hotel sector an interesting, demand signal if you track this type of data. But it also probably speaks to the fact that in the short-term rental business, there is an element of potentially still a bias towards leisure travel, which typically books further out. There are different booking conditions attached to these type of rates as well. So all of this can contribute to this difference, but it's really a trend we've observed across, I want to say 90% of the worldwide markets, really the majority of the markets around the globe, with very, very few exceptions. So that is one of my favorite data points. But I think the other one that's very interesting for the hotel people on this call as well is how prices are evolving. And I don't know, for anyone here who works in the hotel sector, I think this has been much discussed years back, where some markets drop prices close to arrival. However, if you look at the worldwide stats, actually hotels are quite steady, right? There is not so much fluctuation. Some markets tend to go a bit up, they yield up towards arrival, others do drop a bit. But what is very significant is that short-term rentals really drop prices significantly towards the arrival. And obviously it's a binary game. Either you sell your unit or you don't, especially if you just own one of them and it's not within a hotel complex or so forth. So that's something that we can see in almost every single market. So it's a very, very interesting trend. Can also speak to the tooling they have in place. There are different facets, I would say, but yeah, definitely one to talk about. I think that already concludes my intro.
Thank you, Nadine. And I'll take the opportunity here to say that if there are any boutique hoteliers that are tuning into this webinar now, or even short-term rental property managers who want to share any additional insight or commentary on what they've experienced or have been experiencing, please pop this in the chat and I'll read that out as it just adds some more insight to this conversation. But Nadine, sticking with you for a moment here, we can see where the market is at the moment, right? But what key themes do you think will be shaping the market in the next 5 years?
So I have to honestly say, after the pandemic, I promised myself to never make 5-year projections ever again. But if I can just share some themes that I do believe we will keep on seeing, depending on the economic conditions, of course, is definitely professionalization of the short-term rental space. So what we see right now is that while there are also a lot of tools available in that space, it is very fragmented. So you have a lot of players that do not really have a, I would say, significant size yet. And now you see some of these companies really emerging as leaders. You will probably see some consolidation. So this space will professionalize, and that's relevant for hotels because, like we see now, the pricing trends, we see how the practices of revenue management distribution might not be leveraged to the fullest. Well, they are getting there and potentially quicker than we were in the hotel space, where revenue management emerged in the 80s, I would say. And we did this for a long time in Excel, and to a certain extent, we still do. That segment is skipping that part. So they go straight into tooling, but that space will definitely evolve. So I think that is, professionalization is one key theme, consolidation of tools. Something else I do think we'll continue to see as well is generally hybrid concepts. So hotels embracing, while maybe you cannot say you compete one-to-one between a hotel room and a short-term rental room, there is a significant amount of business that is being done in that space. So you see now the chains tapping into this. You see the OTAs tapping into this. So Booking is now selling vacation rentals. So everybody wants a piece of every pie, it seems like. So definitely this will continue. And just to name a last theme, just because it just has to be named, I think AI will play an interesting role in all of this. How do I, as a user or as a guest in the future, make this decision? Right now, I almost make the decision the moment I open one platform or the other. But how will this look like? Can I just say, this is my purpose of my travel, this is what I'm looking for, and some sort of clever chat is going to return to me what my best option is? Literally, shall I stay in a short-term rental? Is this purposeful for my trip, or shall I stay in a hotel? And how do hotels or short-term rental providers play with that? I think that will be an interesting space to watch from my point of view.
Quick question here, Nadine, that we've had come from the audience. Did your analysis break out larger short-term rentals to compare similar occupancy stays? Would you mind just commenting on this for a moment? For example, Mark says, I can see short-term rentals having longer booking lead times if the average occupancy is much higher.
Yeah, that's a very good point. So for this analysis, we really looked at the full lot, but it's an extremely interesting point. And I was actually hoping I would come to it later, but happy to address it at this point in time. We do provide this data to our users, right? And this is exactly the first thing we tell them. Do not necessarily just look at everything that is happening in the space, because that can be very, very noisy, but really look at your hotel and try to filter what is relevant to you. So this could be the size of the accommodation, how many people they can accommodate. This could be which level, so what level of luxury are we talking? What is the average selling price to make sure we're playing in the same league? What's the location? So there are a lot of filters you can apply to this to really make it relevant to your own business. And I encourage everybody here on this call, should you ever want to run such a comparison, do use your own property as the baseline and filter out whatever is not relevant. The shared rooms, private rooms. For this, we definitely looked at individual accommodation. So no shared rooms, no couches, no nothing. But whenever you face this type of data, definitely look at that. Very good tip.
Thank you. Eric, I'd like to bring you in here to comment on these trends, I should say, from an investment perspective. I mean, what are your thoughts on the future trends shaping the boutique hotel and short-term rental market? And I'd like to follow up with, how is that shaping investor appetite, or how is investor appetite shaping in response to these trends?
Sure. And I have to say that I really agree with Nadine. I think that you as an operator today need to be more diverse and be able to adapt your product, your operations according to the demand, and it can change quite quickly. You cannot only today cater to one segment. I think you have to be able to cater to more segments in order to drive good revenue and profitability. But what we have started to see, and what I think is a change in how the investor looks at an asset, we have started to see more private boutique hotel owners opening up to divest their assets. More of that stock is in the privately owned segment and not owned by the larger players, and they are not maybe as financially strong either. So what we have started to see now, and I think the deal that you mentioned, Eloise, that we did with Bob W in Helsinki is a very good example of it. So we source off market, a private hotel, which is fairly outdated on the technical and the commercial side, and where an owner doesn't really have the interest and energy to do a new extensive renovation program and to be, a long-term owner of that assets, which opens up a very good opportunity for an investor like us that has a more of a opportunistic value add approach to acquire the asset at a very attractive entry yield and to do a new value add journey with a new partner with an expertise in this area. And therefore, we really like Bob W as an operator. We're very impressed by their growth in Europe lately, and they have a very strong local track record. So that process is very important. So yeah, we think that sourcing and investing in existing boutique hotels, but then adding this expertise within the design and tech-driven operations that can sort of really boost the operating margins is something that we, and I'm sure others also find very attractive. So we can, and we like the case where we take something old and outdated and we bring new life to it, not only from a product point of view, but also from a ESG point of view.
Mm-hmm. Would you, just because I'm curious, do you see those tech-enabled operators having real potential to grow? Particularly, I see more tech-enabled operators within the short-term rental space than I do hotels at the moment, which I see greater synergies here with the great example that you've given with the Hotel Jardin in Helsinki. Is from an investment point of view, is it the tech side that's what's driving that?
I think it depends on location and the asset. That sort of tech-enabled operations is not for all hotels. You have to be very location-driven for that, and enabled to sort of engage the local community and be able to maybe work with local F&B or gym and fitness, for example. But I think it's also a good tool because the room configurations of some of the smaller boutique hotels varying between say 30 to 60 rooms. It's not easy always driving a profitable business. But in order to cut a lot of the overheads, Bob W, for example, together with other growing operators in that segment, they are able to drive a much better margin business. Mm-hmm. So while also compared to a few years ago, I think the product and the marketing and the brand has become much, much more attractive and can really sort of compete with the other sort of boutique and more upscale products in the segment, but that offers more of the other services that's more hotel related.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Eric. Daniel, let's bring you in here because I gave some brilliant examples earlier of how some hotels are diversifying and adding new inventory to their sort of the bricks and mortar of their hotel. But what's the potential return on investment for hotel owners adding that short-term rental inventory to their offering?
Yeah, I think Eric touched on this, and I think it would certainly be a demand-driven change as well. And I think that in itself presents a whole lot of opportunities. Diversification, which Eric touched on, I think is a huge part of it as well. And that creates an opportunity, diversifying whether it's revenue, market, or even segments as well. I operated a boutique hotel. We had at the time 62 rooms, and we added 18 short-term rentals to it, and it had an incredible impact on of course the average length of stay, on our average nightly rate, on the clienteles that we had as well. We saw, of course, we were able to attract families, for example, even corporate as well, for longer stays who are looking for more of that kind of comfort and convenience. I have to say personally, I've spent my whole career in hotels. And when I travel, I like to stay in a short-term rental. because I prefer the kind of easy access as well, the kind of the tech basically solutions that are there, and no need to kind of stand in line and wait for a key anymore. I think those days are over. So yeah, I think there's a lot to benefit from, and I think diversification kind of sums it up.
Mm-hmm. Would you mind, for those that are to understand the business model of Ood, would you mind sharing how the company has evolved, especially with the operating the hotels in-house as well? Could you
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. So I mean, Ood Hotels were actually an Estonian company founded in Tallinn in 2016, and the company started as a design and manufacturing, essentially, right? So we produced our first mirror cabins, basically, which are kind of complements existing hotels. But what we saw was a lot of our clients were purchasing the houses and putting them up or operating them as short-term rentals on platforms like Airbnb and VRBO. And we saw they were doing incredibly well. Experiential accommodation, this concept is very much about privacy. It's about nature. It's about getting away. It's about contactless as well. So guests come here. As Eric said, this concept it suits very well with this the tech solutions that are out there nowadays. So keyless entry and contactless check-ins and digital concierges and so on. So yeah, late 2019, we launched as well Ood Hotels. So we're kind of operating in both spaces. We have clients who are existing hotel operators who are interested in either complementing their existing offering or attracting a different market, where obviously it's a tiny kind of tiny part of the tiny house movement. So it's an experience that's designed for two people. And yeah, so it's been an exciting journey so far, and a bit of both. We have some clients who operate it purely as short-term rentals, and we have also we've seen hybrids, and really happy to see that both models actually work really well.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Daniel. And on that note, Eric, can I come back to you here and pick your brain to see where else are the opportunities here for value creation in hospitality real estate? Understandably, we're focused on this webinar on hotels and short-term rentals.
Mm-hmm.
Could you expand on that? Are there any other asset classes that are catching your eye at the moment? Are we going to see more of a hybrid world?
No, I mean, I think we are that we will see more hybrid offerings in all segments, not only sort of the more sort of boutique driven, but also maybe one level up, but also going down in the segments. I think that you have to again become more diverse in your offerings. But what we are currently looking at in this market, which is not easy always, is that we have started to see some office space in very attractive locations. That could be vacant possession, or with struggling tenants, with an owner who wants to look at other options. So again, that could be a very good value add conversion opportunity for us. But again, very location driven. But we are actually in the final stage of signing our first sort of change of use, which is that strategy, where we acquire something with a very good location, empty building, to convert into this short-term rental product, similar to what we did with the deal with Bob W. Another space that we are currently working towards, which we like, is the economic and budget segments, looking at secondary and sort of secondary strong regional markets, but also strong flow points. Looking at the regional markets in Sweden, but also the Nordics, you have supply that we consider to some extent are quite outdated and very inefficient from a space point of view. Having conference, having a lobby, lounge, restaurant, heavy on kitchens, cost, labor, etc. So what we would like to do is look at a product to streamline all of that, and do something very, very new, very fun, attractive. Also from the hybrid point of view, adding sort of long and short stay together. So you can go very diverse in the market, also towards seasonality. but basically to challenge the existing regional stock with something new.
Mm-hmm. Oh, well, I'll be keeping my beady eyes on what you're up to, no doubt.
Just chip in there quickly, Eloise,
Sure.
because I just heard like both of you talking also about the difference like of the hybrid concepts and how you basically bring together what be it the hotel side of things and the short-term rentals or even office spaces as a concept. And maybe from a supplier point of view, let me just add here that this is obviously something that keeps us busy as well. Not only us, our competitors, and probably hopefully all tools in the space. Why? Because traditionally many tools are built with a specialty, especially from a BI point of view. A lot of BI tools are built around room revenue, around the classic hotel inventory, around one competitive set you can compare yourself to. But what we see now is the lines are blurring to an extent that you don't get away with that anymore, right? So we have a lot of clients ourselves that ask, can I have several comp sets? Why? Because I'm competing with this hotel for rooms, but I'm competing with these short-term rental businesses for my long stay. And I don't even want to talk about office space. That's indeed the whole question. Can I look at total revenue that I'm generating from my asset rather than just this one niche or this core segment of my business? That is not really my core anymore. So that poses really interesting challenges to the technology world, because we need to catch up with all these concepts as well. And only a few players are, I think, warming up to this type of flavor to be able to combine everything in one. And it's hugely interesting to watch.
It would certainly suggest that there's going to be greater consolidation down the line, be that with M&A activity or maybe launching new tools and products in order to keep up with these trends. Nadine, I'm curious, are you monitoring any other sectors apart from hotels and short-term rentals, or is this not?
We always monitor. I would say definitely the short-term rental industry is probably, I would say, the next vertical up. However, I would say we loosely monitor anything that follows the same principle as hotels. So basically, where do you have a fixed inventory that you can optimize, right? We're taking this very much from the commercial management standpoint. So those could be one day parking lots, anywhere where you have anything that could be cruises, airlines, but that's really far in the future. I would say for us, the next step is the short-term rental industry and to really trying to establish I don't want to say perfect hybrid, but to look at which elements from the short-term rental industry can we really adopt in our hotel-focused toolkit and vice versa. So what do we do in the hotel space that potentially also the pure short-term rental industry can benefit from? So those are definitely things we're keeping our eyes on right now.
Could you provide some examples of how users are actually utilizing the data that you provide? And I know you gave an example earlier that there are many different filters that you can play around with, but I wonder if you can actually provide some real actionable examples, what you're seeing in the market at the moment.
I would say there are, and now I'm trying to not overgeneralize this, I would say there are probably three approaches to using this data at this point in time. There is a rather tactical approach where you would say, depending on my type of hotel, what I can look at, and I should always look at, is which type of short-term rentals in my city, in my surrounding, are like me and are potentially literally stealing my business. Where are they? What are they charging? Am I competitive for a specific length of stay, for the specific number of people? How do I compare? And what our users like to do is to, based on all these basically filters I mentioned earlier, because somebody asked a smart question, is to establish something like an additional competitor. Whereas they would usually look at the 10 hotels around the corner, they look at the short-term rental business in their city as well as a competitor when they make their daily decisions. They look at the occupancy of these listings, like I illustrated earlier in the data, to see where some hotspots might be that I might not see yet in my own hotel. That's another good use case. So that's really the tactical side of things, of incorporating this data point in your day-to-day and into the tools you're already using potentially right now. Where it gets also very interesting, so that's technical, is the strategic standpoint. And this is something we heard the guys talk about as well, where you ask yourself, which target market am I constantly missing out on? And we heard already families. There was a massive debate. I can't remember where it was. Was it Skift Forum, Focuswire, one of those, where they were discussing that there's a shortage of connecting rooms in hotels. And I found that so extremely interesting, because why are we talking about this? Because families or bigger groups traveling together don't have an ideal experience often in hotels, because you can't really hang out in anyone's room unless someone has a suite. So that's where, for instance, short-term rental can win. And if you monitor what's happening in your market, which listings do sell and where, you can also draw interesting strategic conclusions like, shall we tap into this market altogether? So we maybe want to have short-term rental inventory. Shall we have more connecting rooms? Shall we have a better family offering? Shall we have, I'm just going out of the box here, a room allocation service where you can assure that groups can stay next to each other, families can stay together, which is often not given these days. So there are a lot of options of how to react to this without even having to say, okay, I compete with them now, or I need to buy completely into the trend. But the truth might be lying somewhere in the middle, I would say. So that's the second point. The third point is, not at all. I won't look at this data and I'm not using this data. And that still happens. And we're discussing it a bit earlier, where especially luxury hotels do have the tendency to say, honestly, this doesn't touch me. I am not competing at all with Airbnb listings. And they mean really at all. In many people's heads, I would say Airbnb travelers are still these crazy hippies that like to crash on someone's couch and ideally don't pay anything for it. But the reality is, and that's something that we also see in our data, there are a lot of upscale listings out there. Even some are serviced. So you might argue that in certain markets, you could get a superior luxurious experience in one of these rentals and these villas. So it's really not as black and white as they don't touch me at all. They probably do. The question is, what do you decide to do with that? And how do you navigate through that space? So yeah, the space has evolved a lot. And I think it is not as easy as it was maybe 10 years ago, just saying that, well, yeah, these are just dusty couches and they have nothing to do with me. But it's a lot. We're doing a lot of educational work as well. I hope many will be watching this webinar. It's really awareness that needs to grow, I would say.
Just like how we've seen the blurring of business and leisure travelers, and I'm not going to say the dreaded term because it's a terrible term to describe that kind of traveler, but we're seeing it again in terms of the product type, and a perfect example, we've had some commentary from the audience here. From Edinburgh, I'm in the short-term rental space and moving to the boutique hotel segment. One thing I would say for rentals on price evolution, it will largely depend on the location of the short-term rentals, depending if you're city centre or maybe on the suburbs. Daniel, coming to you next, and we've touched on the tech-enabled operations of these hotels, and be it on the operations side, whether you are in the short-term rental space, but what is required from an operational standpoint to ensure that efficiencies and brand consistencies are upheld? I mean, I've seen where oud mirror houses or hotels are in these wonderful locations, almost in the middle of nowhere, beautiful nature location. So how do you ensure that operationally it's all consistent across the portfolio?
Yeah, it's a challenge, but there are solutions for sure. Our concept is kind of based around a deconstructed hotel. And so as opposed to having 100 rooms in one building, we're looking at having 100 rooms spread out across the whole country, usually in nature spots as well. And I'll follow up on something the subject Nadine touched on was also about having more space for families, but or just for guests. But what we've also seen is privacy is a huge element as well. Guests are not only looking for, but they're also prepared to pay for privacy. So the more private you can create the experience, I think the more sought after it is generally. In terms of efficiencies and brand consistencies, Urd as a company, we're very much a soft brand. And we're trying to kind of avoid this cookie cutter kind of style. So we do give, there are, of course, guidelines. And I think there's two kind of layers here. One is, of course, planning. And then the second is execution. Under planning, all the technological solutions out there, things like, of course, this researching the best PMS, the channel management, guest communication solutions as well. We are still at the beginning of the journey, but also very focused on technology. So everything is kind of contactless throughout the process. Guests, they book, they pay, they order, they communicate, all digitally and online. And that allows us as well to run a very lean business model. And then on the other side, in terms of execution, of course, SOPs, brand guidelines, training, and a big word is in the STR space. And I'm learning a lot about this now myself as we venture into new markets, especially in the United States, for example, now where we've signed our first locations, is the regulations, regulatory compliance. There's a lot to learn in that journey, and of course we want to make sure that we know what we need to know.
Mm-hmm. Daniel, I'm going to ask you a question from the audience because I understand you've got a background in hotels and hospitality, and Eric, I'd be interested to hear your thoughts as well here. How can short-term rentals capture guest loyalty like hotels and boutique hotels? And do you think we'll see short-term rental loyalty schemes? I mean, hotels have long leveraged travel programs in terms of the sort of points and rewards systems, I suppose.
I would say yes, and I mean I would even give a real life example of myself. So I travel quite often. I'm also a big fan of Bob W. I like the convenience basically that they have created, and in that sense, whenever I do travel and there's a Bob W, I would opt to stay with them. I think in the STR space, one thing that's really important for that is consistency, because that's really where a lot of the let's say listings or inventory are just not consistent, and that doesn't give a sense of loyalty or create a sense of loyalty. But I think certainly an interesting opportunity. If Bob W were to start, I think they have their inner circle, if I'm not mistaken, then that would certainly be something to explore. Mm-hmm. What do you think, Eric?
No, I definitely agree, especially on the consistency. And as I sort of mentioned, starting with, I think that the new up and coming short term rental operators are becoming much more competitive and aggressive on product offering and design. So if you can keep that sustainable while growing into other strategic destinations, I think that you have a very good chance of creating a very loyal customer base.
Eric, whilst we're with you here, do you think that we're going to see more players enter the short-term rental space, or do you think that we'll likely see greater consolidation through M&A activity instead?
I think that we might see some M&A activity in the coming time, actually. But I also think that you will still have new local players popping up, who's very sort of strong locally and know the market very well.
And Eric, do you think that we touched on the tech-enabled operators earlier, but do you think this will lead to new business models?
I mean, I think that the ones who's very good in this space will just keep on developing their business concept and become more competitive. I think that these platforms can create a good tool to sort of control the consumer even more, and sort of integrating other functions of your travel while you're visiting for business or for leisure. So I think integrating more offerings on that same platform is a very interesting way going forward. A good example of that is formerly Nordic Choice Hotels, the largest hotel chain, or one of the largest hotel chains in the Nordics, just did a brand switch into strawberry in order to, be a bit more flexible and also integrate, concerts, airlines, restaurants, and I think that's quite interesting because then you can also reach out and partner up with other loyalty programs to reach even more consumers.
Mm-hmm. I would like to ask this question to the whole panel because I would be really interested to hear everyone's thoughts on this. And again, a question from the audience. Would you say service department concepts are, in a way, the ideal balance of hotel and short-term rentals? And if so, are they the primary competitors to short-term rental concepts? Eric, I will hand over to you as somebody who's got a hotel and extended stay, and now obviously the new short-term rental operator coming into the market here. What are your thoughts on this question?
I think it's a balance. I think you will still see both. But what I think, but it also going back to advancing tech into hospitality, what I think is really interesting also going forward is that how we can measure more of operations, especially from an ESG point of view. How much we consume and how you can sort of communicate that to the consumer, and also combine that with good prop tech. Then I think that we have a really good chance of understanding how we can improve assets over time into becoming more green.
Mm-hmm. Nadine, what are your thoughts on this? You cover a couple of different sectors already. Where do you see service departments sort of within that landscape?
I was thinking about it while Eric was speaking, actually, because I think the answer, this might be a little bit annoying, is probably, yeah, it depends. So is that a good, I would say, is there a place for service departments in this ecosystem? 100%. I do see that. Is it only service apartments that would play a role here? I do not necessarily think so. I think there is also still a side, and here I'm going more onto the short-term rental side of things. And Airbnb recently also mentioning how they want to go a bit back to the basics. So they want to really connect what they want to do in the beginning, connect the hosts, so the locals with the traveler. So that is not a very, let's say, professional approach to hosting, but this is where they see the future, because I believe it is clear to everyone that the traveler today the bar is quite high. We're all looking for experiences rather than just that bed to stay in. So I guess service apartments for sure, but there will also still be space for this raw experience of the shared room within the house. At least they're really believing in that space. So I would say we'll see many, many different flavors emerging. A fun fact, I just want to say that because Eric was just talking about sustainability. We just did a study the other day about this as well. And what is really interesting is that is really a space where the hotel industry is leading big time. They have a lot of hotels around the globe are starting to be certified as green, and the short-term rental business is lacking. And this will start to matter when the first companies also are starting to want to be fully sustainable by 2030, the goals we've seen around the globe, or hopefully we want to get there. And they will demand that of their travelers as well, to travel green, to stay green. And there's very little transparency on that side. So there's definitely space, I would say, to catch up with what the hotel industry is already doing.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to take this opportunity here to say that this Thursday, I'm hosting a service department news webinar on the future of business travel, of which we are going to be talking about the ESG agenda and how that is shaping travel programs and types of accommodations that buyers and bookers are staying in. So if anybody's interested, you can join me this Thursday and learn more about that. But Daniel, what are your thoughts on service department concepts and whether they are the primary competitors to short-term rentals?
I wouldn't say the primary competitor, but I would agree there's definitely a space for it. And service departments is something that has been around as well for a while. I don't think they're going to disappear or anytime soon. And I certainly think there's space. It might very well be just a budget as well thing. A service department has a perception of a higher nightly rate, whereas an STR is, let's say, more affordable. as well. That's and again, I would say demand driven. So basically, depending on where the demand is coming from, that's where you should kind of cater or design your product for.
Mm-hmm. And your product, Daniel, it sits perfectly in between boutique hotels and short-term rentals. It is right in the middle here. So I'm going to ask you a question about what the short-term rental sector can learn from boutique hotels, but also vice versa.
Absolutely. I mean, from boutique hotels, they can definitely, I would say, things like experiences, consistency, standardization to a certain extent as well. Design, I think, is a huge thing as well. Oftentimes, boutique hotels, of course, are very thoughtfully created. Amenities, standards, SOPs, and all of those benefits that you'd find, or let's say in a traditional boutique hotel. On the other end, I would say technology, definitely the boutique hotels can certainly, I would say, are a lot more traditional, maybe more set in their ways, whereas the STR is more kind of fresh, more tech driven. And I think that is huge. So flexibility, pricing as well, could certainly definitely, I find a little bit more flexibility in the STR side as well, and a bit more affordable. So it's a matter of finding that right balance, I would say.
Thank you. Thank you, Daniel.
And I think Bob W is also a very good example of that balance. I think they've really addressed, found a need in the market, and have really created something for that as well.
If there's any more, would Nadine or Eric like to share commentary at this point, or are we? It looks like we have covered so many topics in this almost 1 hour conversation. So I'll say my thank yous now to Daniel, to Nadine, to Eric for sharing their insights.
Thank you.
I have some closing slides that I'd like to run through very quickly before we sign off today. And what I do want to flag is we are hosting the Short-Term Rental Summit on October the 18th at the Skyline in London. And this is in partnership with Skift. And we are selling tickets. And I figured it would be a perfect opportunity to share this event, as we are on a webinar about boutique hotels and short-term rentals. And viewers of this webinar, exclusive to Boutique Hotel News, we are offering our viewers 50% off their tickets. You have to use the code BHN Summit 50 to secure those. So if you want to click the link into the chat and grab your tickets, we would absolutely love to see you there. I believe we have a short video from my colleague who has highlighted 5 reasons why you should be at the Short-Term Rental Summit. So let's see it and hear it from Paul himself.
Hi, it's Paul here from Short-Term Rentals, and here are my 5 reasons why you should attend the first Short-Term Rental Summit in London on Wednesday the 18th of October. Number 1, this is our inaugural Short-Term Rental Summit, and we'll be providing in-depth coverage of the day and all of the conversations on stage. Number 2, we'll be exploring all of the key topics that you're talking about, from regulations to AI, sustainability, investments, and much more. Number 3, we've assembled a high-caliber roster of speakers from across the travel, hospitality, and real estate landscape that you don't see at all of the other conferences. Number 4, from panels to pitches and even debates, our various session formats give you a little bit of everything. And finally, we're bringing together 100+ attendees so you can network with other leaders and investors. Don't miss out on this must-attend event. Book your Short-Term Rentals Summit tickets now.
Perfectly said. And another event that I would also like to flag, the Urban Living Insights Hotels and Hospitality in-person event is taking place on October the 25th, again in London. We have a presentation on investment and finance. We have a panel discussion on the squeezed middle. We've talked a lot about economy, hotels and luxury segment today. We also have a session on measuring ESG. So once again, topics that we have covered in today's session. So if you are interested in joining us there, you can find further details in the chat. And if you're interested in working with us across our in-person events or even our webinars, please do get in touch with my colleagues Rav and Piers. Their details are up on your screens now. So once again, thank you so much for tuning in today. Thank you again to Nadine, to Eric, to Daniel for your insights. I hopefully will see you on Thursday's webinar for Service Department News, but otherwise take care, enjoy the rest of your day, and I will see you all very soon.